Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hello, you're listening to the podcast, So There I Was. This is episode 96. Hoka Hey.
Hoka Hey.
There you go.
The great Tuntini's back.
Yeah, welcome him back. He was our first rotor head on the show. Had some great stories about going from the rag and flying Navy helicopters to having a co-pilot use his head as a step stool to get out of a burning aircraft. Ooh. And then on to this week, we're going to talk about some of the arming of Navy helicopters. Initially resupply and vertical replenishment, that sort of thing, but they could be used as weapons platforms as well. And he played a part in that.
Tuntini's got a lot of information. You know, he's very passionate about that sort of thing. He was involved in modern weaponry that they're carrying right now that led to, well, the 3 Hellfire missiles being shot. I guess now it was a couple of weeks ago, right?
Right, a few weeks ago.
Sinking the boats
off the Gravely in the Red Sea.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting history of it. He knows it all because he was part of the process. Yeah.
He was there. He did that. He made the T-shirts.
He did. And as always, I learned something.
Right. Absolutely. So before we get out of the way and listen to him, we want to send out a couple quick thank yous. First of all, to Tuntini, not only for taking the time to spend with us and talk about this, but for his cash donation. He contributed $50 to us to help keep this show coming to you. We're deeply appreciative of that. A gent by the name of Rich Walker, new call sign?
Dog
Walker.
Thank you,
He contributed $25. Thank you. And we have a new section lead this week, Steve Morovitz. More of this, more of that.
More of what? More of what?
Yeah. New section lead. Thank you very much for stepping up there. And none other than Bud Spencer, who contributed $100 directly to the site. So we are deeply grateful for that. Yeah.
Very humbling.
Why people are cracking their wallets open and giving us money.
They're keeping the wheels of So There I Was turning, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And it's awesome. Thank you.
Or in this case, this week, the main rotor. Keeping the main rotor turning.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good catch. That's
there
right.
You go. All right.
Whirling shit can of death, moving parts going in every direction. What
is it? I was giving Sticks grief about it the other day. A helicopter is a million parts rapidly rotating around an oil leak, waiting for metal fatigue to set in. So,
perfect. I couldn't have said it better myself. Much more eloquent than I said it.
So let's get out of the way. Here comes Tuntini. Don't sit on the...
This here is a true
collective
story about crossing the pond at night in the world's smallest cockpit on the tanker through the weather. Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Well, there I was crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the...
So there I was in Pensacola, Florida, at NAMI.
Oh boy!
In a auditorium packed with flight surgeons, the naval aviator's biggest nightmare. And if you want to know what happens next, keep listening.
Okay, that's terrifying all in itself right there. Welcome. That's how it starts. Welcome to So There I Was. And this is one of your cohorts, Fig. I'm in Kearney, Missouri today. Where are the rest of my cohorts? Sticks, where are you?
Well, I'm in Lee, New Hampshire, and we are just having a great time. It's nice and chilly here. Yeah, that is something that will raise your blood pressure for sure.
Oh, man, and then some. RePete here, coming to you from Maastricht in the Netherlands. About to fly home tomorrow, but wow, what a great lineup we have tonight. I want to welcome back a gent we had on a show earlier, author of American Quest, and a new book available to read to your toddlers when Christmas time comes around. So Looking for Santa Claus. So the great Tuntini, Wayne Tunick. Welcome back, sir. We're glad to have you back. That is a terrifying aviation tale if ever I've heard one. An auditorium full of flight surgeons. Oh, my God.
Yeah, no, that's not good at all.
Oh.
Let me say to you guys, you probably don't remember from last time, but my greeting, Hoka Hey, which is the Sioux Chief Crazy Horse, alleged
Let's roll, right?
Alleged war cry, Hoka Hey. So Hoka Hey to you. Thank you for letting me be on again. And just as a note, I'd like to say I donated today so that I could sit here and say to everybody else, these guys, all three of them, do a great job. And I recommend for everybody to donate. So,
wow. Well, we're humble.
That's fantastic.
Thanks, Tuntini.
Even with your Marine handicap, you guys continue to amaze me. You added sticks, and he keeps the academic flow going. So it's really coming together. So great on you for doing that. And like I said before, I reviewed my last talk like any good naval aviator. I'm going to do better this time. I can't get rid of my New York accent, though. You're just going to have to live with that. And if it bothers you, hey, I'm from New York. I don't care. So
forget about it.
Yeah, forget about it.
That's right. Hold on. You talking to us? I wanted to bring you back. Obviously, some great aviation stories. For those who haven't read American Quest, it centers around a young American boy from West Virginia in high school trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life and becomes a rescue swimmer. And it's a hell of a ride from there. It's a great story. So thank you for that story. That was awesome. More, I think we wanted to have you back and chat more about the arming of Navy helicopters, that they're not just a search and rescue platform and a vertical replenishment platform, but they're a battle platform and have been involved recently in the news. So which is a great stepping off point, I think, to talk more about that. And if I guess if you could chat about it, there was one involved with the guided missile destroyer. Was it the Gravely?
Yeah,
a couple weeks back.
It was the Gravely. I'm going to talk about that, but before I do, again,
good.
In keeping with my critique of myself, of my flight last time, one of the things that I found lacking was humor. I don't think I was as humorous as I am known to be, believe it or not. And so I was at NAMI. How did I get there in this auditorium full of flight surgeons? So
it sounds like a beginning of a bad joke.
Well, the joke is coming. Stand by.
Oh, okay.
I was the CO of the RAG, and one of my pilots came in and said, hey, Skipper, I got a problem with allergies, and they're sending me to a med board at NAMI. And that meant there was going to be a determination of whether he would be permanently grounded. So this was a big deal type thing. So I'm like, well, when is that? And he's like, next week. And I'm like, okay, I'm going with you. So
right on.
We both flew out there and got to NAMI, big auditorium, and filled with flight surgeons. And the interesting thing, I don't know if they still do it, but at that time, it was run like a trial. There was a prosecuting flight surgeon that was giving why he should be grounded, and then there was a defending flight surgeon that was in front of all these flight surgeons, and then they would make a determination. So we were in the auditorium, and they said to me, typically we don't see the COs come to these things. And I'm like, well, I'm here. Maybe I can say a few words before we begin. So they said, okay. So I get up there, and gave him a greeting, and then I said, so let me tell you a story. So this naval aviator walks into a bar, puts down his money, and he orders a drink, and he says to the bartender, you know, all flight surgeons are assholes. All of a sudden, in the back of the room, a guy stands up and says, hey, I take exception to that. And the naval aviator looks at him and goes, why, are you a flight surgeon? And he goes, no, I'm an asshole. So that
did that loosen the crowd up?
Once, and it got about a few chuckles. So that tells you, you know, flight surgeon humor. Of course, my pilot that I was there to help was shaking his head in the front row.
Oh, and, sure.
Yeah.
My career was over.
He
thought my skipper just put the nail in my coffin, for crying out loud.
He thought it was over, and after that, they said, okay, he needs to leave, and so do you. And I said, why do I need to leave? And he said, well, we're going to be deliberating on, they had a whole bunch of discussions, you know, beforehand, and we're going to deliberate this. And I'm like, well, why do I have to leave? In fact, I'm not leaving. So I sat there and I listened to the deliberations, and I only weighed in a few times. The big thing was, you know, there was a 1/1 billionth chance that his allergy would flare up, and, you know, he would have breathing problems. And because we're in a multi-piloted aircraft, you know, I mean,
right.
That's right. It's not going to cause a crash. So they actually came to the conclusion that, you know, he could not fly single piloted, but in a multi-piloted, he was okay. They gave him a waiver, and everybody was happy. He went on to be a CEO and have a great career, and that was great. So that was the joke. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did enjoy that joke. Thank you.
That was
Tuntini.
awesome.
And let me tell you, you can swap out that, because like when I was at the NRO and working with the Air Force, instead of flight surgeons, you just say all Air Force are assholes. So it can be used in many circumstances.
It's a multi-usable tagline there. That's nice.
You could use it with lawyers.
That's efficiency right there. That's right.
So
lawyers, nurse practitioners, whatever.
Yep. So here's the one interesting fact I think I wanted to just sort of bring to the forefront. So Tuntini was our first rotor head on the show, and I happened to actually be the second. So you've got -1 and -2 on the show, on the show. But I actually had really wanted to, when I was still flying with the Coast Guard, I actually wanted to become a flight surgeon. And even went as far as going, and we use physician assistants as our flight surgeons. I went to the Admiral of Health and Safety and pled my case and said, I know I'm a commissioned officer, and I know the PA program is for enlisted members only, but I'd really like to go. And I lost, but I did ultimately opt to. So I then got out, and I actually went on to become a nurse practitioner. So, but that's a whole nother long story. So, and not why we're here.
Again, he couldn't fly single piloted, but that brings me to, and again, I'm going to get to the armed helo piece, but the next story is interesting, and that is I'm probably one of the only people that has flown the S-860 Bravo single piloted to the ship at night. Our NATOPS mandates what your crew, and at night you have to have, you know, a qualified hack and a qualified co-pilot. And the way that happened was when I was a lieutenant, I was the Airland NATOPS evaluator. And that meant that I went to all the squadrons and I gave them their NATOPS evaluation. I flew with their NATOPS officer, and then I gave a
Right.
test, and then they either passed or failed. And in that role, I was also
I think he locked up.
Oh, he froze. Okay. Well, while we're waiting for him to come back, and I'm certain that he will, I wanted to mention that NATOPS is the manual by which we do everything.
Yeah. What's NATOPS stand for? NATOPS.
Naval Aviation
stand for?
Training and Operating
Standard.
Standards. Yeah.
Procedures.
Yep.
Procedure standards. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he has frozen and gone away.
So while we're trying to work on getting him back, this is one thing that I can totally add. So the H-65 can be flown single piloted, and I have actually done a couple of more than one or two single piloted flights. But going to the ship at night single piloted is insane. I mean, I'm curious to hear how or why that was done. I'm sure it obviously was done according to standards, but
I'm kind of curious as well. I was wondering if he single pilot because the other pilot was not there mentally.
yeah.
I think we've all been in that situation before, where we've been flying with somebody that really wasn't there, so we were kind of all by ourselves.
Yeah. Well, probably that was me the first time I was flying in the helicopter, but that's okay.
Oh, geez.
So
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the other interesting thing, and Tuntini had mentioned this as well. The airborne use of force, or the AUF for the Coast Guard, actually was started with what's called the Helicopter Interdictions Unit. And he was talking about using a Coast Guard sniper with a 50 cal on board their aircraft, which I thought was an interesting point. And I guess our gunners mates, our snipers on the helicopters have actually gotten to be extraordinarily proficient. But it brings an interesting point because using the Coast Guard for that, you have to kind of use the Coast Guard for that because otherwise it becomes a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. It becomes an act of war. So
Yeah, because Coast Guard's not technically part of the DOD.
right, we're now DHS. We were DOT, but then that makes it a law enforcement intervention as opposed to a military intervention. So that's why
my
I
internet
use the Coast Guard for that.
screwed up,
Hey,
but I'm
he's
good
back.
now.
He's back. Yay! All right, you left off right at explaining being the NATOPS basically model manager and giving check rides, and then you froze.
So I was giving that. My job was to be the NATOPS guy for the East Coast, and what happened was one of the other squadrons, the 60 Bravo, had only been out for about 3 years or so and in the fleet. And one of the other squadrons had a mishap. They crashed on takeoff. And basically what we found was two things. One is that the pilot became disoriented. One of the pilots was killed. And then the other thing was the pilot was taking off. We had automatic altitude hold, and he had that on. So that was set to basically 0 at the deck, or 30 feet, because the deck was 30 feet off. It was at 30 feet. And instead of hitting the release button for pulling the collective up, he basically left it in and just pulled against it. And then when he let his pressure off, when he got higher in the air, it took him back down, which changed the NATOPS procedure that basically said, you could no longer do that. But the big thing was there was no NATOPS procedures, believe it or not, for how to do a takeoff from the ship. And so that led me to try to figure out, okay, how is everybody doing this? And so I flew with guys on the East Coast. I flew with people on the West Coast. I flew with our Canadian exchange pilot. And turns out everybody was doing it differently. The East Coast would take off and basically let the ship drive out from underneath it, do a pedal turn, and then go. And the West Coast, they would pull into a hover over the deck, and they would dip the wing to get away and then go. And the Canadians, they would slide out parallel to the deck and go parallel to the ship. So,
Whoa.
what was the best takeoff? Well, I didn't know in the future I would be connected to NAMI, but at the time as a lieutenant, I called NAMI, and they had a spatial disorientation expert there. And he was willing to come out and fly with me, and I would show him the different takeoffs, and he would give a opinion on which takeoff was the best with respect to spatial disorientation. Because one of the things that we found from the mishap was the pilot that took off from the mishap bird, when he lifted off, instead of letting the ship drive out from under him and being stable, he pulled back stick and was going backwards. Then he stopped and threw the nose over, and with the fluid in your ears, moving backward and then forward in that manner can set you up to become disoriented. So,
Right. Yeah.
So the question was, how can we avoid that? So I put in a waiver with Syncland Fleet to fly this flight surgeon at night, which meant I was single pilot. And
Oh, yeah. Okay.
surprisingly, they agreed to it.
No way.
And we went out there, and of course it was the darkest night ever. And, one thing that I learned that night was, wow, having a co-pilot makes a real big difference.
Yeah.
Helping talk you through things. And this flight surgeon was sitting there. He was just loving it. And I was sitting there soaking wet.
Right.
You have no idea how much danger he's in.
No, he didn't know.
Yeah, I would just be saying to myself, this guy doesn't know. We're about to die here. But
No.
we went through the landings. Luckily, everything went out okay. And then when he filed his report to me, it was the Canadian takeoff was laid out, and then they went, and that didn't have any forward back motion. However, I knew that us U.S. helo guys were never going to buy into the Canadian way. And so what we did was we did a modified version of the way that we were doing it on the East Coast, which was to let the ship drive out and then do a pedal turn and go, which they still pretty much do today. And, so that was the story of being a probably the only 60 pilots, single piloted.
Was the SH-60, the Bravo, was that the only airframe that didn't have takeoff procedures written down in NATOPS?
Well,
from the ship?
I mean, I had flown the H-2 and we had takeoff procedures. It was just,
I'm surprised. I guess I'm surprised that an airframe came into being and people who had flown helicopters obviously had some input in putting the manual together, and no one considered putting shipboard operations takeoff procedures into the manual.
Yeah.
That's stunning in retrospect.
It was, surprising. Again, everybody focuses on landings, you know what I mean? And
right.
Takeoffs were just kind of assumed, nobody is, typically pilots don't have problems taking off. They have problems landing.
Right.
So that somehow got missed, but we got it in there. And again, it taught me the lesson of, the co-pilot and the critical information that person gives, because you're pretty busy and having another person there telling you something like you're low or whatever, that really helps you keep you where you are. Just, it's just like the LSO, right, on the carrier. I mean, that's your
Right.
coming in for the landing. They're getting cues from that person, just like we have in the helo sitting right next to you.
Right. So that illusion that you were talking about is actually called the somatogravic illusion. And that is also the same technique that's used in flight simulators. When they want to simulate the aircraft accelerating, they actually will the simulator pitches the nose of the aircraft or the simulator up. And the gravitational forces, I can go through a whole dissertation on this and you don't need it. But the point being is that they use that illusion to give you the sensation that you're actually accelerating. And that's what actually probably happened. I was kind of surprised that you would use the modes or your autopilot modes at all that close to the deck, because we would never, we were hands on the entire time. The other thing is we had a field trim switch so that even if you were using one of the modes with the collective, you could push on that button and you could then fly through it. So I was curious as to whether that was a feature in the 60.
Well, it was. There was a little trigger underneath the collective, and so that you could pull on that, you could make power changes and then release it, and it would hold your altitude at what you released it at. But for some reason or another, they had flown on the deck we did fly onto the deck with the altitude on, because the altitude hold on, because if you got all screwed up and you released the collective, it would hold you where you were. So That was part of the approach. Now the NATOP says turn it off before takeoff, but prior to that, it didn't say that, even though most people did it. And in this case, he left it on, and instead of pulling the trigger, he fought against the trim that was trying to bring him back down, and then when he released it, it brought him down. So, but yeah, that's I guess the way of NATOPs, right? It's written in blood, and
exactly.
We all know that. So, but I do want to now get to what RePete was talking about, and that is last month. That was a big milestone in naval aviation, and that is a aircraft from the USS Gravely deployed to the Red Sea launched, and they destroyed 3 Houthi boats that were attempting to board a commercial ship. And as you know, we're at war there in the Red Sea, not just helos. I saw a thing the other day that there was a Marine Harrier pilot that shot down 7 drones.
Yeah.
And
that was a great article.
Badass.
Yeah. The discussion whether he should be an ace or not, because of what the definition of ace is. But the one thing that I would bring up is, these destroyers that are out there, having spent my whole career flying off of destroyers or frigates, they are under supreme stress because of where they are in the Red Sea, near the strait there.
Bab el-Mandeb.
They're so close to the missile launch that when a missile is launched, the CO of the ship has 15 seconds to decide whether he's going to shoot that missile down. Because, those ballistic missiles are going Mach 5.
Oh, right? Yeah.
So
it's happening now.
Yeah. And you can imagine that, those ships and those sailors, they are, at general quarters or close to it almost all the time. It's a very stressful thing for them, and it's really remarkable that what they have done, along with the strike aircraft from the carrier and the things that they have done and the Marine squadrons. And unfortunately, I don't think it's getting enough press for what they are doing there and what they're going through. It's a really dangerous situation, because if one of those goes through, that could be, I mean, you could lose a ship like that, a Navy ship. So the 60 Romeo came off of the Gravely. They were a detachment, and they shot these Houthi boats and destroyed them, killed 10 Houthis. And really, we have not in the Navy shot boats like that and destroyed it with a helicopter since Vietnam. So it is a big deal. And one of the things that, kind of bothers me is when we discuss helicopters, everybody lumps helos into one thing, helos. Even though they're all different, they have different missions. And that's kind of like just saying, oh, jets, and if it's got a jet engine, it's just a jet. It's not an F-18, it's not a Growler, it's not a Harrier, it's not an F-35.
Right.
And so in the Navy, we have, two main areas. One is designated HSM, which is Helicopter Maritime Strike. And then the other is Helicopter HSC, which is Helicopter Sea Combat. And they do different missions. HSM flies the Romeo, and the Romeo is deployed both on the aircraft carrier and the destroyers. And it's a sophisticated aircraft because it does ASW, anti-ship warfare. It can do SAR. It can do VERT-REP, but it's mainly ASW and anti-ship. Has a very sophisticated ESM system and a tactical data link along with a FLIR that can link that FLIR. So the battle group commanders love that, because when you're flying around and they're trying to figure out who's doing what, the helo can fly over and link the FLIR picture directly into combat, both on the carrier and also to the destroyer. Now, so sometimes those squadrons will go and they'll deploy on the carrier and they'll deploy on the DDG, and it's all the same squadron. In the case of the shoot down, that was HSM 44, and they shot the ships, but they also have expeditionary squadrons which support ships that aren't with carriers that deploy independently. And HSC is the same. They are on the carrier, and they also support the VERT-REP for supply ships, and they have expeditionary and carrier base. So typically the carrier is going to have two squadrons on it, HSC and HSM, and all those destroyers will have HSM debts on them that are there supporting the destroyer. And the weapons that the Sierra and the Romeo carry, they can carry Hellfire missiles, M240 machine guns, GAU 21, which is a 50 cal. Okay. Sierra actually has a 20 millimeter fixed forward firing that they can carry as well, and 2.75 IR guided rockets. So it's got a pretty good amount of weaponry on it as well.
I hate to interrupt the flow. Can you break down HSM versus HSC?
I got it.
For our listeners.
HSM, Maritime Strike, HSC, Sea Combat. My question is, can you have one squadron with both missions, or are those separate squadrons, separate mission sets?
Both missions, meaning like VERT-REP and
HSM squadron Will it also have HSC helicopter capability?
No. It's just
Okay,
the
so
HSM
squadron
flies,
specific.
HSM flies the Romeo, HSC flies the Sierra.
Okay.
The Romeo is kind of the tactical one that has all of the bells and whistles. The Sierra is more of, for instance, in the Romeo, we can only fit 5 people in there because of all the computers and everything that's in it. The Sierra can put like 10 people in it because it's almost like a Black Hawk. It doesn't have the computers, but it does have the guns. So the HSC and Sierra, one of their missions is combat SAR. So, if they were off the coast and somebody had a launch for a combat SAR off the carrier, it would be an HSC. If somebody had a launch to shoot a missile, it would or Hellfire. It could be either, but if it was coming off a destroyer, it would be the HSM Romeos that do that.
Gotcha. Okay, that's the breakdown I was kind of looking for. And just for our listeners, CSAR or combat SAR is combat search and rescue for a downed pilot, for a pilot who's off the carrier, had to eject, been shot down, something.
And that list, sorry, Tuntini, that list of weapons that you rattled off, Hellfire, M240, GAU 21, are those all on the Romeo?
All of them are on both aircraft except the Sierra has a 20 millimeter fixed forward fire, and that's not on the Romeo. And the reason is because the Romeo, because of all the computers and everything, is weight limited, and the rounds for a 20 millimeter are so heavy that in order to take enough to be worthwhile, you wouldn't have enough weight,
right? Enough
power.
So you alluded earlier to the fact that this hasn't happened since we haven't had naval helicopters armed since the Vietnam War. When did we start arming them again? When was that?
That's a great start. So just a little armed helo history. In Vietnam, there was a large helicopter squadron called Helicopter Combat Support HC-1, and they flew H-1 Hueys that the Navy got from the Army. They were armed, rockets, machine gun. H-3, you might have heard the term for the SAR, the H-3 SAR helo was called the Big Mother, okay? And then they also flew H-2s, and the H-2s would be deployed on destroyers off the coast, and if an airman went down, they would go in, and there's the famous story of Commander Clyde Lassen. There's a destroyer named after him. He was in HC-7 flying the H-2, and he got the Medal of Honor for picking up 2 downed airmen. Basically, got all shot up, turned his lights on at night, barely made it back to the destroyer with almost zero fuel, and was given the Medal of Honor. Great story. Clyde Lassen, if you ever get the time to look him up. But in the beginning of the Vietnam War, it became very apparent in the Mekong Delta that support to the Brownwater Navy by helicopters was going to be needed, and they basically took all the Hueys out of HC-1 and put them in one squadron called Helicopter Attack Light, HAL-3. And if you haven't heard of HAL-3, the Sea Wolves, there's a number of different videos on the internet and books about them. It's the most decorated squadron in the Navy. 5 Navy Crosses and 31 Silver Stars, and just basically they flew off of barges in the Mekong River and boarded SEAL insertions, small boat, and just an amazing thing. They started in 1965, and then they were decommissioned at the end of the war in 1972. In fact, the squadron was never stateside. It was commissioned in Vietnam and it was decommissioned in Vietnam.
Wow.
And so just a quick story on that. So I was an HSL guy, helicopter anti-submarine light, and that was the predecessor of HSM. They changed the name, and the HSL, we flew the SA-60 Bravo, which was the predecessor to the M860 Romeo. But almost all of the leadership of the HSL squadrons many of them were Vietnam helicopter pilots, and a lot of them were from HAL 3. So when I was a young Lieutenant JG, my CO, was running around with a Silver Star and Purple Heart,
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I like it too. Cool. I was reading the story about the Navy pilot that, crashed his aircraft, Tom Hudner. I forgot what the movie is that was out about that here recently. Remember, in Korea, he crashed his aircraft next to.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so he got the Medal of Honor for doing that. But in that book, I'll get the name of it, but the pilots in Korea, a lot of their wardroom, the pilots in the wardroom, many of them were aces from World War II. So you can imagine you're a new guy and you come to the squadron and you're sitting there and, your OPSO is a ace from World War II.
Right. So, no intimidation there.
No big shoes to fill up.
You're probably going to listen to them. So,
right. Well, you should.
Yeah. But so our Commodore, when I was that NATOPS evaluator, the Commodore, he was a decorated HAL 3 pilot, and he had not flown the 60 Bravo much. He was pretty much flew the H-2 after he got back from Vietnam, and then he became a Commodore. And so I was supposed to give him his NATOPS check in the 60 Bravo. And so, we go out there, and of course I'm the NATOPS evaluator. I'm supposed to be doing it by the book. And we're going through pre-flight, and I'm asking him questions. He doesn't know any of them. Get in the aircraft. Obviously he can fly better than anybody, but he doesn't know, any of the NATOP stuff, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so what am I supposed to do here? Not pass him on his NATOP check? Here's a guy from HAL 3, Vietnam, obviously he could fly. He didn't know, the names of the stuff and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, you passed. See you later.
Right.
So the book title that you were looking for was Devotion.
Devotion, yeah. It was a movie also, great movie.
So interesting side story with that is that he intentionally crashed his plane to help his wingman, and his wingman, when he crashed, was the first African-American naval aviator. So interesting side fact. Yeah.
And what I meant to mention also was those helos flying off the DDG, the Gravely. The Gravely is mentioned, is named after Vice Admiral Samuel Gravely. He was the first African-American officer to be on a warship, first CO of a warship, first fleet commander, and first African-American admiral. So that's quite a name on that ship there.
Nice.
So I want to double back and actually, ironically, for a helicopter pilot, I want to bring it back to like the 10,000 foot level. What is the significance of what the Gravely is actually doing, and why is it important?
Well, I mean, we've been in the Gulf, since 1980. And typically, our problems have been in the Gulf, not in the Red Sea, in the Straits there. But what we're fighting in that war, which is an interesting development, is essentially a terrorist group has significantly shut down shipping from through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, and they have no navy. And our Navy is fighting them. This is really the first time, in the past, navies have fought navies for sea control. We're having a sea control issue here against a terrorist group that has no navy. And it really, the missiles that the DDG is firing are standard missiles. I think they're about $2 million a pop, and they're using them to shoot down, $1,000 drones. It's unsustainable.
Right.
And it's really made the Navy surface community start to think about how are they going to take this on in the future, because obviously, bad guys are watching this, and it doesn't take, a genius to figure out, keep throwing drones and they'll run out of missiles,
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a very difficult situation that they're in. And of course,
and I would liken it to a knife fight in the phone booth. I mean, there's no open water really there in the Red Sea for our Navy to operate. They are really constrained because it's such a small body of water.
That's what makes the whole area so tough, is that if you're shooting a cruise missile or ballistic missile, if the CVN is in the Gulf, the Iranians can shoot a cruise missile, you're talking about less than a minute arrival time.
Right.
The distances are so short, it's very difficult for you to have the defenses that you need.
Right. And this goes back to actually, I think one of the fundamental questions is, why do we have a Navy? And that is about projection of power, and that projection of power is there to protect shipping. And, I was just looking this up. So through the Bab el-Mandeb, you can generally anticipate around 22,500 transits of vessels passing through there. It accounts for about 12% of the seaborne trade globally. And it sounds like it might be an insignificant thing, but the problem then becomes you now have to transit down around Africa if you're not going to go through there. And there are also issues coming up with those ships now not being able to get insurance if they're going to transit through that area. So protecting that sea lane is vitally important to our commerce. And I think,
So Lloyd's of London is booming.
Exactly.
But what's that number, Sticks? 12,500?
22,500 transits per year. And that was in 22.
Per year. Okay.
A great place to actually look for some of this is there's a podcast that's done by a guy was a SUNY Maritime grad, actually a professor at Kings Point now, called What's Going On with Shipping. And he does a great job, along with Ward Carroll, who also has talked about this as well. There's been some great information out there. And I think it kind of goes back to, we need to recognize what the Gravely is doing, the sacrifices they're making, and what a significant impact they have on global shipping. And that, if you think about it, how many navies in the world can actually remain over the horizon as we are? And I think it can't be overstated.
Again, it's a tough situation because we're not essentially carpet bombing the bad guys and ending the whole thing, and that makes it much more difficult for the Navy. So, but I wanted to continue a little bit more and get us up to the armed helo of today, of how we got there. So we talked about HAL 3. They got decommissioned in 72. In 76, the Navy decided to bring back 2 armed helo squadrons, HAL 4 and HAL 5 in the reserves. And that's pretty much where the armed helo piece of the Navy resided. Those squadrons flew H-1s. And in the 80s, they transitioned to the HH-60H, which was a Black Hawk version of the Black Hawk, had Hellfire machine guns, rockets. They were in helicopter combat support, HCF 4 and 5. Those guys, they deployed in the Gulf War. They deployed in Iraqi, Haiti. They were deployed quite a bit. You know, they sent 2 and 4 helicopter detachments. And now they were transitioned to the Sierra, and they became HSC 84 and 85 in the reserves. And 84 was decommissioned, and they're looking at decommissioning 85. So there won't be a reserve. Of course, now we have armed helo in the active force, but that didn't happen. In fact, when I was in the H2s in 87, when we did Operation Earnest Will, which was protecting the tankers the first time in the Gulf, we reflagged the tankers. If you remember, Reagan reflagged them and we escorted them. The H2s had no self-protection capabilities. We had no chaff or flares. We had a machine gun, no missiles or anything, but the big worry was chaff and flares, you know, if we were going to be shot by a man-pad or something like that. And so when I was in HSL 36, the H2 squadron, the SecNav James Webb, Marine, I'm sure you guys have heard of him.
Yeah, he was the Secretary of Navy when I was at the basic school.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
He also wrote the book Sense of Honor, which actually is one of the things that really motivated me to go to a service academy. So,
yeah.
Great book.
He came to our squadron, just happened to come and be there, and we were in the wardroom, had a bunch of people in there, including the admiral that was in charge of our wing, and one of the pilots said, "Why are we doing this escort mission with no protective equipment?" And Webb looked at the admiral and said, "Hey, admiral, that sounds like a leadership problem." Or the admiral.
Now my career's over. Crap.
The admiral was dumbfounded. But the interesting thing was, literally a week later, there were teams in the hangar putting that equipment on.
Nice.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we had very little arming capability. In the Gulf War, we had no real armed helos that were deployed on ships. And what we did is we relied on the Task Force 160, the MH6s. Those are the little birds. You've probably seen them in Black Hawk Down, guys hanging off the skids. So what they did is these Army guys came on Navy ships, mostly frigates, and they would bring 2 little birds aboard and fly off the Navy frigates. And these guys were amazing. I mean, you know, you've heard of Task Force 160, the Night Stalkers. They're the special ops group. They flew on night vision goggles. They were, you know, flying at the top of the water, you know, the top of the waves. You know, there was one story, one of them had a ditch in the water, the other one flew over and threw out a rope ladder, you know, pulled the pilots out. But the problem was that because these guys were ship qualled, they kind of rotated a small group through constantly. And they were deployed all the time, the same people. And the Army got sick of it. And I was finishing up a tour at Nav Air as the aide to Nav Air, and I went to the Pentagon, air warfare, and the Army called up and said, "We're not going to do that anymore." And so we no longer had that. In the Gulf War, we had to depend on them, and we had to depend on the allies like the UK, because the British Lynx helicopters, they were armed and they could shoot boats and things like that. so that really started the plan to get armed helos. And the way it was done was we bought armed helo kits, and that required putting a FLIR on and mounting for weapons, etc. The bottom line was we had 85 kits and 359 helicopters. And so there was no way that was going to keep up with things. And that really, showed that we needed, in our next generation of helicopters that were being built, the Romeo and Sierra, we needed to arm them. Unfortunately, it was still a question because this was a budget issue. And as you know, naval aviation is typically run by TAC Air admirals, and they weren't 100% on board with arming and spending money. And so that's where I kind of came in. After my command tour, I was sent to the Pentagon to be the head of maritime requirements and the director of air warfare. And my goal was to arm the Romeo and Sierra that were being built.
Okay.
And I had to go through a bunch of briefings to get that approved, all the way up to the CNO. I briefed the CNO on a few occasions, and it really came down to the VCNO, who was Admiral Fox Fallon. He took it on board as he was going to make the decision, and the real key component of it was how many and what kind of helicopters we were going to put in these new helicopters in the battle group. And in the Pentagon, myself and Admiral Killer Kilkline, we would go and brief the VCNO, and we would keep going back and back. He'd have different questions. We'd have to answer them. And, but we needed that piece so that we could budget for it, and we couldn't get the decision. So finally, one day we were in there, we were supposed to get the decision. You had all the other air admirals in the Pentagon, and we briefed, here's the options. You can have this many, this type, and how much it would cost. And at the end of the brief, he still didn't make a decision. And I was a commander at the time. And he said, okay, I think we're done. And I looked at the admiral, who was a 4-star, and I said, Admiral, when I woke up this morning, I said, I'm not leaving this office until you make a decision. And he laughed, and he goes, I think we should have 22 helicopters, which was one of the options. And they went around the room. Everybody said, yep, 22 sounds good. And they said that became what we got that approved. But the big problem was the arming of those helicopters was not budgeted. So we were short a lot of money to get them budgeted. And, money is tight in the Pentagon. And again, aviation is run by typically TAC Air, and there wasn't a lot of money to be spent for that. But one night I was at my desk in the Pentagon at about 1800, working late, and I get a phone call from the budget shop and a friend of mine, and he says, I've got $600 million I need to put on budget tonight. And we had that whole armed helicopter piece for both the Romeos and the Sierras. Okay, and when I say armed, one of the big pieces of the arming kit is the FLIR. Okay, you need a FLIR to be able to shoot a Hellfire with the laser designator, etc. And so we put a FLIR essentially on every Romeo, on every armed Sierra. There are some Sierras that just do vert rep. They don't have an armed kit, but not a kit, but they don't come off the line with it on there.
Right.
It's not a large amount. And so today all of those helicopters, you'll see them on the news and stuff. They have on the nose, you'll see that big ball up front. That's their FLIR. And, I kind of can't help but smile when I see that because.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me feel good. And not only that, my son is an HSM pilot. And so he's getting the advantage of that, even though, of course, nobody knows how the whole thing happened. But one of the pieces that I forgot to mention was in order for me to get it to the CNO and VCNO, I had to get it past my boss, which was the 2-star in charge of naval aviation in the Pentagon. And that was the guy, Admiral McCabe. Wizard was his call sign. And again, he only had a limited amount of money, and helos was not his number one priority. But in the briefing for the decision to him, I knew it was going to be a big back and forth. And so my son was a wrestler. I brought in, and I came into the briefing with wrestler headgear on to brief Admiral McCabe. And the whole brief, I would say something, and he would say something back, and he goes, "That's a 2-point reversal, right?" And he was going back and forth with me the whole time. I don't think he listened to what I had to say, but he sure liked the wrestling piece of it, and he gave me the thumbs up. So that was kind of the whole story of how we got to where we are today, where, when those Romeo and Sierra first came out, or when it was first approved, was in 2001. And now 22 years later, we shoot the first Hellfire. So it's taken a while, but, I think that was a big milestone in naval aviation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
Well, hells to the yeah, it is.
Nice.
And it's kind of maddening when you realize how long it takes to get, from concept to kinetic weapons going down range.
Right.
Well, you guys are, attack pilots, and I'll be honest with you, there was a lot of institutional reluctance to, let helicopters have dangerous weapons. Well,
yeah,
I get that.
Just look at the quality of the moral part of the individuals that fly those death machines.
Exactly.
Do we really want to trust these people with, weapons capable of really doing mass destruction? It was, it's a moral question, and I guess we finally got the answer. And yes, we can trust these.
Well, if you've ever seen,
and they're kicking ass. Yeah.
You've ever seen the movie The Bridges of Toko Ri?
Oh yes, yeah.
Mickey Rooney is a helicopter pilot, that wears a green top hat.
Right.
And that was one of the things in my briefing. I would start out and saying, "This isn't the Bridges of Toko Ri helicopter pilot. Okay. We need to put the right weapons on." And again, they BZ to that crew. They just happened to be the crew there at the time, but you can imagine they're arming those and they're flying those all the time, ready to shoot the next boat that comes out there at the wrong time.
Hey, Tuntini, you just said something that I think we need to define. I don't know that we've ever defined it before. So you said BZ to that crew. Well, I know what BZ means, but can you define BZ for our listeners that are not naval aviators?
So that's the term, and I'll let Sticks look it up because I don't have that on the tip of how it came. It has to do with the, flag, signaling. But Bravo Zulu, BZ, is, the term used in the Navy for, well done, good job.
Yeah.
Good finish, maybe? Because Z's the last letter? I don't know.
Attaboy.
Yeah.
What it is it was used on signal flags. So when you wanted to let another ship know that they did something well, you would put up the Bravo Zulu flag. So Bravo, that's where Bravo Zulu came from. So,
Nice. Well done, Sticks. I knew. Yeah, that was a good call.
I'm like
Good call putting it right on Sticks.
I'm like a repository of trivia. Actually, I knew the answer to that, but I did look it up before I brought it about. But
Of course you did. I would expect nothing less.
I always like to verify things before I open my mouth. But what are you gonna do?
That's the opposite of me.
One thing I forgot to mention was, so before, during one time I was on drug ops down in the Caribbean. And again, we didn't have a armed helicopter. And also we did have a machine gun, but we were not allowed to use it in counter narcotics ops. There was a lot of reluctance to use guns because we didn't want them shooting missiles at us and et cetera, and, escalation.
Sure.
But I was chasing a Go Fast. Go Fast boat is a, big multi-engine, outboard engine, boat loaded with drugs. And they were hauling butt to get back into Colombian waters because once they crossed into Colombian waters, we couldn't chase them. And I remember flying over the guy, and of course we couldn't do anything. And the guy obviously knew it because he was sitting there in the boat giving us the finger.
Of course.
But
that's got to make you mad.
yeah,
too.
things change though, and Sticks can probably tell more. But the Coast Guard came up with these Hitron squadrons.
Yep, helicopter interdictions unit.
Yeah, and so we take Coast Guard snipers on board our helicopter, and they have a high-powered rifle. And if they try to, hightail it into international waters or not stop, they'll take one shot in that engine and blow that top of that engine off, and they're dead in the water.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually this is what we now refer to in the Coast Guard as the AUF, or the Airborne Use of Force mission. Fascinating, progression. I actually was in and flying at the time that the unit stood up. The first time that we experimented with it, we used the MD-500 Explorer, which is a NOTAR helicopter. The big advantage being that you did not have any lateral limitations on your how fast you could go when you were in flight, because one of the maneuvers they do is they will fly sideways along the almost parallel to the track of the boat, and then they would fire some rounds out in front of them to basically get them to wave off. And then the kill shot comes with a 50 cal, and they put a round into the engines and we'll shut that down. But it progressed from the MD-500 Explorer for a very brief period of time to the Augusta 109s, and then actually migrated back to the Dolphin. And our Charlie, now Delta version of the Dolphin now has that mission for the helicopter interdictions unit. And the whole reason, again, that why the Coast Guard can you do this and not the Navy is because we are not part of the Department of Defense. We are actually part of the Department of Homeland Security, so it becomes a law enforcement engagement, not a mission of or not a defense operation. So it's otherwise it becomes like an act of war.
Actually, when we're on counter narcotics ops in the Navy, and we have the lead debt, the law enforcement debt on board, if we're going to go board a ship or something, we actually have to strike up the Coast Guard flag.
Yep.
Because the Navy vessel, it has to be under Coast Guard control, not Department of Defense, because the posse comitatus, which prevents the military from doing police actions. So,
yep.
But these days we don't have that problem, and I guess in the end, it's all a good news story that these helicopter pilots were well armed. They went out there and they fired. Hopefully, that will give more confidence to commanders that they can do that mission. and will be used if needed in the future. But it was a long process in getting there, and which is in the end kind of surprising based on the remarkable history of HAL 3. You would have thought it would have been a lot easier, but
Right.
the budget process has a very short memory, and this was mainly driven by budgetary pressures to not pay the money to buy the equipment that was needed to be able to do what they did.
So did you ever fire a weapon off of one of the helicopters?
I didn't get to. When I was the CEO of HSL 44, we had a Hellfire, and I arranged with the strike group commander during a COM-2X we were the first squadron to fire, or the first fleet squadron. Some of the test squadrons had fired Hellfire, but we were the first fleet squadron to fire a Hellfire, and we fired it at a boat target. And I sent RePete the picture of that. It's actually on the back of my book also. You can see it. It's in flames. But the interesting thing about that was, again, no one had done that. And I personally briefed the strike group commander and convinced him to do a Hellfire shot, because it was scheduled to be I think it was a Maverick shot that they were going to shoot from a TAC Air aircraft. And so when one of the things, Hellfire it's kind of a tricky missile to use over the water. You have to laser designate it, and if the laser hits the water, it can reflect and go off in different directions. And the detonation of the device has to be set correctly, because if you're going through like a boat with plywood, the Hellfire missile was designed to penetrate a tank and then explode. So
You can go right through one of those wooden boats and out the other side, and it'd just be a hole in the boat.
Exactly. So when we were setting up for that Hellfire shot against the target, I had my crew that was going to go fire it. One of the guys, I said, I want you to go to the target.
There it is.
Yeah, that's the target boat there on fire. I want you to go down to that target shop down in Puerto Rico, and I want you to make sure that the target is set up for us, so this thing's going to detonate. And so what that required was blackening the windows so the laser wouldn't reflect off of it accidentally, and putting some extra plywood up in some areas so it wouldn't go through. But the pilot that I told him to go to the shop in Puerto Rico where they had the target, he goes down there, and some guy that's been there like 30 years is like, what do you need? And he's like, I need to look at the target we're going to shoot at. And he's like, nobody ever does that. And he's like, you don't know my CO. Bottom line was, of course, I didn't want to be the first one to fire and it goes through and doesn't detonate, right? Because what kind of picture would that be if the boat wasn't on fire? So he did all the stuff that we told him to. He blackened the window and everything went good. But we surprised them that target there was going to get a pre-flight before we were going to shoot at it.
Nice.
Hey, Tuntini, I got a quick question for you from Bago. He wants to know, and actually I do too. This is a good question. Back to the scenario where a Navy ship puts a Coast Guard flag out. Do you have to have Coast Guard personnel on to legally do that, or you just do it because you can?
No, you have to have a Coast Guard law enforcement debt.
Okay.
The debt, if they're going to board, the debt, and it's a police action, they have to do that.
Right.
You don't have to have a dead on board. You could strike up the Coast Guard flag and be under Coast Guard control, if you were just doing something with a ship without the debt necessarily being there. But typically in the drug enforcement, it's all a police action, and really the Navy does not go without the debt on board because they can't do anything without them.
Okay. All right. Now this is one last thing. This is for either of you fine naval aviator rotary wing pilots. My man Sticks said something, and I knew what it meant, but I thought, so Sticks in casual conversation when he was rattling off all the smart things that come out of his mouth hole, said something about no-tar.
Right.
And I thought, no-tar, is that like a light kind of filterless cigarette? Or, but I know what it means. But can you one of you guys please define no-tar for our non-rotary wing
good
aviators that are listening, or maybe non-aviators that are listening?
You want to take that one too, Teeny?
I'll let you.
Okay. So no-tar is no tail rotor. And
that's what that is.
And so it actually is very unique looking. It's like a big pipe that comes out, and you can direct, basically, I believe they use some air coming out of the compressor section, and you can now get your anti-torque effect using that. But the big difference...
So would you say it's kind of like a puffer duct?
So you mean like on the Harrier?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's probably a little bit like that.
Okay.
And it actually rotates longitudinal along the longitudinal axis of the helicopter. So it's a fascinating, totally different approach to it. But and as I had mentioned, the whole reason to use that is that helicopters, when they are in sideward flight, have a lateral speed limitation. So you can't go any faster than typically like 35 knots. What happens is in effect, the tail rotor can enter into what's referred to as like a vortex ring state. And
oh my God.
If the tail rotor goes into a vortex ring state, you've now lost your anti-torque effects, and things can get ugly pretty quickly. So
I just sprained a lobe in my brain there.
Wait, hold on a second. Ring? Did you say ring?
Vortex ring state. So.
Oh my! It's a vortex ring of fire state. My brain locked up right then and there. My sphincter puckered up, and I said, "Thank you, Jesus, for not making me fly helicopter."
I can simplify this in a very simple term. It's basically the rotor system enters into an aerodynamic stall.
Why didn't you just say that to start with? That I can kind of wrap my head around.
Because there are certain features about it that actually are unique. You get a high rate of descent with power in. And, as the rotor wash wraps back around, what happens is the angle of attack is you reach the critical angle of attack on the rotor blades and you come screaming out of the sky.
Hold on. Would you do that again?
Sure. It's like this. Yeah. If I'm doing my pilot thing. So.
And we're going to have some fun at these rotor heads expense here, Fig. And we're going to put up the definition of a helicopter is a million parts rotating rapidly around an oil leak waiting for metal fatigue to set in.
So what you
also see Whirlybird.
Also see Whirlybird. That's right.
Seeing here, Sticks. This is what it's like briefing jet pilots in the Pentagon on why you need helicopters and armed helo.
I keep telling them, this is why, helicopter or jet pilots all look the same to me, though. They're cold, they're wet, they're tired, and happy to see me when they're on the end of my hoist hook.
Well played. Yes, I get that. Yes, well played.
Fair enough.
The best part was, I'll give it a quick side story. I was working in the ER as a nurse practitioner, or as a nurse, and we were doing a reduction, and the orthopedic surgeon, we were doing a hip reduction. The orthopedic surgeon happened to be a pilot. He was a Marine Corps A4 pilot, I believe. Anyways, he was being a bit of a jerk. And so somebody goes, "Hey, John, weren't you a helicopter pilot on the Coast Guard?" I was like, yeah, I was. He goes, "Oh, weren't you a jet pilot?" And I'm like, yeah, I was. Or says to the surgeon, he goes, "Yeah." And I said, and all those jet pilots look the same to me, cold, wet, tired, and happy to see me. So.
Nicely played. All
Yeah,
right.
Well played. Well played. Wow.
So, all right.
Well, hour
Well,
and 23 minutes went like
Yeah.
that.
boom, done. Yeah.
That.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming back. I can't tell you how much we appreciate that.
was awesome, Tuntini.
yeah, it was indeed.
Well,
it was indeed.
I appreciate the invite, and I also appreciate, having been the first helicopter guy, and now listening. I can't wait every week to listen to the next story, and you've had a number of helicopter guys. I'm sure you're getting a lot of TAC Air guys saying, "Why are the helicopter guys in here? Can't they get their own channel?"
You know what is amazing? I've had several of my TAC Air guy friends say, "You need to get more helicopter guys on. Those stories are amazing.
Those guys are nuts."
It scares the living shit out of me when they start talking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're absolutely right. We do. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tease this. You said something about Task Force 160, the Night Stalkers. We got a guy coming on.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
I enjoy the distinct privilege of being one of the partners in the podcast that is the one guy who's a helicopter pilot. So,
I can point to a helicopter and
brains.
say helicopter, but
And the brains of the operation.
there you go.
No, that's
Bago's back in the background doing magic shit right now.
I think that's great that you included that, and the stories that you guys have brought to life they're just amazing. I just wish you could do like one every day, kind of like the Tonight Show.
Right?
Once we retire, maybe,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this has been fun stuff. Yeah.
It really is, from the people that you've had on, the junior people to the senior people. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they're flying. It's just the stories that they have to tell. Boy, if we could get that to young pilots, maybe they'd be safer, because there's a lot of lessons learned there.
So to wrap it up, do you have like one last story about like maybe landing this ship at night?
Actually, I do have a wrap up. It's not about landing on the ship,
Okay.
but it's Marine Corps oriented. I think it's relevant. And so when I was CO of HSL 44, we would once a quarter have a leadership day, and we would go to a local theater and have somebody come out. And one day, one of the times, we were lucky enough to have Captain Everett Pope, United States Marine Corps. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah.
The name sounds familiar,
Yeah.
but I don't know
Same
why.
thing.
Yeah. So Captain Pope won the Medal of Honor in World War II. He was on Peleliu, and he was, you can read the write-up, but basically him and his group that he had there, they were told to keep a hill, and they fought through the night. They ended up fighting hand to hand.
Rocks and bare fists, it says.
Yeah, they were throwing rocks at the enemy by the time it was over, and it was an amazing. It's an amazing story about him. Very humble gentleman. I think he got out of the Marines right after World War II, but he talked, and then I asked him a question. And the question I asked him was, first, before I say what that question was, a lot of people don't realize that these Marines that were landing on the islands in World War II, these are the same Marines, okay? They were going from one island to the next, okay? It wasn't, a whole group of different guys. So So they just got the crap beat out of them on one island, and then they had to go load up, and they were going to another island. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
right.
And
Groundhog Day.
yeah. And these guys are 17 and 18 years old. Okay. So the question I had for Captain Pope was, Captain, here you have these guys, 17 and 18-year-old. They just went through a buzzsaw on one island. Now you're loading them up, taking them to another island, and you're going to throw that ramp down again. How did you keep them motivated? How did you, get them to go out that ramp? And he looked at me and he said, 2 words, follow me.
Fuck yeah.
And
holy shit.
Yeah, so the reason I bring that up is you've had a lot of great leaders on, fantastic people. That's a piece of this show. It's not just, about stick and rudder. There's another piece to it, and the leadership that these guys, many of them have put in combat situations and things like that. I find that just as interesting as the stick and rudder pieces. And, I think both in the Navy and the Marine Corps, those 2 words are something that everybody tries to live up to.
Well, that's well said, and I'll take that compliment humbly, and include you wholly, sir, in that leadership. Your efforts clearly made our ability to project power with helicopters far more effective. And I was joking with you a little bit before the show about how much spending time in the Pentagon. Absolutely, it's just not a fun place to be when you want to be out flying helicopters. But it takes people who understand what those people out flying the helicopters and the jets are facing to get them the equipment and the support that they need. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your service. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you for your service, sir.
I was happy.
I think I'll begin to.
I was happy I was able to actually, a lot of people go to tours in the Pentagon. They don't get anything. It's a rough place. I actually was kind of in the right place at the right time. And, I actually can look and say, again, when I see that picture of the helos off the Gravely with Hellfires and a Fleer, I'm like, yep, I know how that got there.
Well, that's right, exactly. But that's part of the humility. That's the part of the humility that we're talking about. There is that I was at the right place at the right time. Well, yeah, but you got it done when others before you hadn't, clearly. So good on you. Congratulations.
And the one other thing I was going to add was you are truly the embodiment of what my alma mater, our motto is, which is acta non verba, deeds, not words. So thank you.
Go.
Thank you for your service.
Well done. So let's let me go ahead and begin landing the plane here. I'll get us set up on final approach, and we'll go through this, gents. First of all, I want to mention again a book, American Quest, available on Amazon, as is Looking for Santa Claus, both by Wayne Tunick. So go out and grab those books. Those are, I'm telling you, American Quest was a fun read, and Looking for Santa Claus, great to help a toddler understand who Santa Claus is. So
I might benefit from reading that book.
There you go. Sticks, what do you think?
I think it would probably help Fig.
Thank you.
Love you, man.
Did you get my text, Sticks?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Hey.
Sorry.
Okay, all right. Well, then Fig and I'll get it.
Yeah, salute to all of our active military members, our veterans, and the families, especially the families who either supported or are still supporting our active duty military that are deployed all over the world right now and actually in harm's way, like we talked about earlier today.
Sadly, we're learning that.
They are in the service, whether they are or not, and without them, without their support, our men and women that are doing that for us, they wouldn't be.
They couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They couldn't do it. Yeah, exactly. Thanks also go out to Dave Hamilton, who has a few shows of his own, the Mac Geek Gab, the Gig Gab, and the Business Brain. And Dave has granted us the technical support and know-how and put us in touch with Cashfly, who provides us the bandwidth for the show, and also Backbeat Media. Online at backbeatmedia.com, they provide us with advertising. And if you have a show that you'd like advertising for, reach out to backbeatmedia.com. See if they can't bring you into this family.
And on the social media side, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Also on Facebook, you can join our Facebook group there. And if you're looking for any sort of technical information or something about the show that we might have, not discussed, like Notar, you can go to sothereiwas.us/glossary. And you can also just find us on the web at sothereiwas.us.
And we just put Notar up on the glossary. It's up there. But if something's not there, shoot us an email. Where would you do that, Fig?
At Fig, RePete, or Sticks at sothereiwas.us.
That's it, yeah. And RePete is REPETE, not the other way, not the conventional way of spelling it. We got some cool merchandise out there. Go to sothereiwas.us/merch to get yourself a cool hat, t-shirt, I don't know, drinking glasses, mugs, anything. We got some really cool stuff
bikini.
there. Go out and see it. Yeah.
We have a bikini.
Yeah. Got it. Absolutely.
I do not look good in a bikini.
Well, there's that. Ooh, kicking stuff here. So, some folks who provide us with other help. First of all, Bago, thank you very much for what you do. He was producing the show for us today in the background. He runs our group over there at facebook.com/sothereiwas.us. We have over 600 folks there, rapidly approaching 700 folks on the Facebook group. And also thank you to you, Tuntini, for the donation you gave us, and another gent by the name of Rich Walker who has donated directly on our website. We thank you for taking that hard-earned money and throwing it in our direction.
Hey,
we don't know why you do it, but we're humbled that you do, and it's great. It helps us bring this to you.
I would say to everybody, donate. Keep these guys going. They look like they're in their last leg. So.
RePete, I think you missed Mr. Rich Walker's call sign.
Oh, I may have.
Yeah, it's Rich Dog Walker.
Call sign. All right, dog. Beautiful.
That's awesome.
And he just pulled his donation. I don't get it. So, all right. Well, and then a couple folks that provide us with a little music. Who are those guys?
Oh, man, those are the two Air Force F-16 pilots that make the Air Force sound good. That's
Dos
Gringos.
Yeah.
They have great music. 4 albums and not one bad song. You can't have a bad day when you listen to any one of those songs. They're all really, really good. Most of them are hilarious.
Spot on.
Well, and in honor and maybe in fear of not getting smacked around more by the rotor heads, until next week, don't let go of the collective.
Don't let go
of the collective.
Yep.
Damn it.
Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the shit I was wearing on that day. Now an F-16 is cramped enough, but it's even worse with all that stuff supposed to save your life. But we knew there was no way. 'Cause when you're going down the North Atlantic, man, it's over.
What?
He said it's over.
Oh boy, is this great!
And we're out.
Awesome.